Motion passes unanimously. That brings us to item 24, please.
Item number 24, approval to transmit to the Department of Economic Opportunity a large-scale comprehensive plan amendment, CPA 14-0005, to change the text of the future land use element and the future land use map designation on approximately 133,346 acres of land from agricultural development and conservation to mixed use, consistent with the Osceola County Comprehensive Plan. The subject property is generally located north of East Earl Bronson Memorial Highway, south of the Orange County line, and west of the Brevard County line.
Jeff.
Good evening, Board. Jeff Jones, Strategic Initiatives. Just a few opening comments to get the public hearing started. As you know, this is a continuation of a public hearing that was held on October 20th of last year. It's been continued on several occasions since then for staff to respond to board direction to meet with those organizations that were at the October 20th public hearing and express some concerns about the potential environmental impacts from the sector plan. We have staff along with the Deseret Ranch representatives met with those organizations on 5 separate occasions from November of last year through April to go through those concerns. We had some very, very productive meetings. We had some very long meetings, some of them lasting all day. But as you no doubt saw when you looked through your agenda packet at the GOPs, we ended up with considerable revisions to the environmental policies as a result of those discussions. So it was a very constructive meeting, and the members of the environmental organization spent an awful lot of time sitting with us and going through some, as you might imagine, some very, very dry material. But we've ended up, I think, with a better set of recommendations relative to those GOPs than we started with. So we appreciate their hard work as well as that of the Deseret Ranch. In January of this year, county staff, in order to continue trying to get a handle on the environmental impacts and be able to address those, we did engage the services of 3 environmental scientists to provide an independent review of the environmental plan. That final report was submitted to us last month, and it has been included, as you noted, as part of your agenda packet. The plan amendment submittal package itself, there are 6 parts to this. As with, this is a comprehensive plan amendment to the comp plan, and with it is the data analysis section that by statute requires us to address those items that are listed up on the screen, the land use and development, water supplies, transportation facilities, other public facilities, regionally significant natural resources, urban farm, and intergovernmental coordinations. It's very much like any plan amendment that we might bring to you, except it is laser focused on the 133,000 North Ranch area. We do have, as Chapter 9, a set of goals, objectives, and policies that contain the revisions that I just talked about with working with the environmental groups. It does have the peer review report as part of that package in order to provide that as background information for the state review agencies should the board choose to transmit the amendment up to them. There's also, as part of the package, and that was delivered to you separately, a letter from Deseret Ranch making a commitment to the board to expand what's called the Central Wetland and Upland Mosaic as part of the environmental plan out at South End near US 192. And there was an exhibit provided that identified those land areas. That commitment is there regardless of what comments are received from the state agencies, whether or not they suggested that it be included. Also, as part of that commitment letter, Deseret Ranch will continue to evaluate the peer review report and work with the state agencies as they do their review and take a look at the peer review report recommendations. Lastly, we do have a modification to Policy 3.2, the Water Conservation Policy, that requires new development on the North Ranch to meet the standards of Florida's Water Star program. That's being introduced as a result of discussions with both the environmental group and with board members. This is the actual language that we would be including, and I direct your attention to the first paragraph in the middle with the language, the sentence that starts, at a minimum, new construction shall meet the Florida Water Star standards. Florida Water Star, as I'm sure most of you are probably aware, is a state program that provides criteria and guidelines for design and installation of plants to achieve a water-efficient landscape. It is currently used by TWA. We have references to it in the comp plan, but this specifically requires it for the North Ranch and any new development that occurs out there. One last comment. If the board chooses to transmit this to Tallahassee, it would go up there for a 60-day review period. First 30 days would be with the state agencies, second 30 days with specifically FDEO that would organize those state review comments, package it up in what's called an ORC report, send it to us, and we would begin to address those comments and recommendations and bring it back to the board for adoption at that time. I'm going to turn this over to Eric Jacobson, who's the manager for the Deseret Ranch. He's going to introduce his planning team, as well as he has a few remarks he would like to share with you. So.
Thank you, Jeff. Welcome, Eric.
All right, thank you, Jeff. And so Eric Jacobson, 4155 Deer Park Road, St. Cloud, Florida. I want to first, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission, I want to start out by thanking all of you for your time. Thank Jeff Jones and the county staff and many of the others that have helped us refine this application, over the last 6 months. I think all of you know that we have been ranching this property since 1950, and in that time we have striven to be and I think have been able to be outstanding stewards of the property. This application or this master plan, long-term master plan, is something that we think is important to allow us to continue to be good stewards of this property over the next 65 years in light of some of the growth that we see coming in Central Florida. We love to be in the ranching business. The ranch is going to continue to be in the ranching business for a long time, for the foreseeable future, and hopefully an important part of the cow-calf industry in Central Florida. So we don't plan to discontinue doing that. That's what we really love, but we think this planning tool or this long-term master plan will be important to allow us to put together a framework that will kind of guide us in the future as we go into the long term. So we're here today to ask for your vote to transmit to the state so that we can get the additional feedback from the state regulatory agencies. We acknowledge the peer review report. We appreciate it. It's helped us to refine our application, and we realize that will be transmitted also along with the application if you choose to do so. And that, along with the feedback from the state, will allow us then to sit down and work out the final plan to present to you in the next 6 months or 8 months, whatever that is. Let's see. We do have our team members here, so if there are questions, we'd be glad to answer those. And then if there are any other new issues that come up from different comments, we'd also like the opportunity to be able to address those if you'd like for us to do so. And with that said, we'd just like to ask for your vote to transmit this to the state to take it to the next level. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions of Eric at this time? No? Okay. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you.
All right, Board, we'll go ahead, since there's no questions of the applicant or staff at this time, we'll go ahead and move into our public hearing. We have numerous forms to speak. I'll remind everyone, when you come to the microphone, please state your name and address to start, and you will be given 3 minutes, and I will abruptly cut you off at 3 minutes since we have such a large number of speakers. So do not feel I'm putting you out. I'm just laying down the terms. Our first speaker is Mr. John Newstreet.
Good evening. It's never good to be first. We have John Newstreet, President and CEO of Kissimmee Osceola County Chamber of Commerce, 1425 East Vine Street, Kissimmee, Florida. We have on file, dated April 13th, 2015, a letter to Mr. Don Fisher, County Manager, outlining our position. I should be able to read this here and then answer any questions. On behalf of the members of the Kissimmee Osceola County Chamber of Commerce, the Board of Directors wishes to express its support of the North Ranch Sector Plan. We encourage the Osceola County Board of County Commissioners to approve the North Ranch Sector Plan at this evening's meeting and transmit the same to the state. Representatives from Deseret Cattle and Citrus were joined by staff from the county in presenting an overview of the plan at the Chamber's board meeting of April 10th, 2015. Based upon that presentation, the board recognized the benefits of the collaborative planning effort that has taken place to date. Understanding there are still opportunities to lay out finite plans, the general concept creates a framework from which to build a vision for growth management in Osceola County. One idea is clear. This is a balanced plan that addresses all the issues that are most important for the future of Osceola County. Connecting our region to grow the economy and new jobs, protection of our agricultural economy, preservation of vital natural resources, reducing dependence on the automobile, and creating great new places for people to live, work, and play. Recognizing and embracing these goals is essential for ensuring the prosperity of Osceola's future. The North Ranch Master Plan strikes that balance and should be approved. The issue of growth management is a very important and impactful topic in Osceola County today. And once again, we offer our support on behalf of all members of the Osceola County, and we appreciate the efforts to date of Jeff Jones and all the parties to have made this happen. Again, we support the plan, and thank you for your consideration.
Thanks, sir. Next, we have Sandra Webb. Okay, thank you, ma'am. Next, we have Pete Dunkelberg.
Thank you. My name, as mentioned, is Pete Dunkelberg, and address is 726 Conway Road. That's in East Orlando. This is a regional issue. It was mentioned earlier that we are regional people. I want to make reference to the peer review report that is now been received by the county and by many of us who have read it. It was requested by the county and paid for by the county. The county went and found really the top-notch conservation scientists, and they did a proper job. First of all, there is such a thing as conservation science. Second, there are a lot of state regulations and state definitions of key terms, like areas of environmental concern and others. I can't say all the terms right off. And if you put those terms of the state together with the conservation science, it leads right to the peer review report. And so no one should have been surprised by it. I hope there was no big surprise. I see no rush to finalize this long-term plan, and I wish to ask the board not to vote to send it into the county just yet, because the peer review report has not really been carefully considered and has not been integrated into the plan at all that I know of. And so I urge that the peer review report be integrated into a modified plan, and that then we should have a a public workshop, bringing in other stakeholders to discuss the peer-reviewed report in relation to the original plan. And I see no hardship in not sending it in right now, because this is supposed to extend to, I've heard 2050, I've heard dates out to 2080. It won't hurt to carefully consider the plan that the county has asked for. In addition, the county may, especially in view of the peer review report, may have been optimistic on how the whole plan will get through the federal regulations on wetlands when it comes to getting the permitting. So some further consideration, instead of sending this in right away without digesting the peer review plan, further consideration is very much in order, I believe. Thank you.
Thanks, sir. Next speaker we have is Belinda Kirkland. Excuse me. Welcome, Belinda.
Good evening, Chairman, Commissioners, and fellow members of the dais. I'm Belinda Kirkland. I reside at 1400 Riviera Drive, Kissimmee 34744. I wanted to start by thanking the various environmental groups that are here and have taken an interest in looking out for the inhabitants of our county that are unable to speak for themselves. One of the things I appreciate about this county is the ability to really enjoy nature. I live off Lake Toho and enjoy seeing all the wildlife, and more importantly, I love the fact that my daughter, and in 37 days my son, will grow up and get to see the eagles and other animals from our backyard, not just at the zoo. To that end, families like ours get to enjoy the balance of nature and civility because of good planning. And that's why I support the efforts that Osceola County staff has made with the owners of Deseret Ranch towards the development of a sector plan for the approximately 135,000 acres of privately owned land. Sector plans are designed to prepare parcels of land that are over 15,000 acres in size and anticipated to be developed over decades. They create unbiased guidelines which preserve natural resources, limit uses, densities, and intensities of growth, and more importantly, they strive to enhance development prospects for the creation of workforce nodes that provide jobs for residents. Responsible planning like this offers families the opportunity to enjoy what Mother Nature has created and not have to sit hours on end in a car every day getting to and from work. Sector plans prevent urban sprawl, protect wildlife, promote development of quality communities, and for that I congratulate the county for their progressive thinking on how this massive swath of land gets developed, and I hope the Commission will support submitting this comp plan amendment to the state of Florida. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next speaker we have is Douglas Sparr.
Good evening. Douglas Sparr, 825 Clifton's Cove Court, Cocoa. I own two properties directly across the St. Johns River from the North Ranch, and one of them is my residence, so I'm kind of a neighbor. I agree with what I've read that Charles Lee said, that a property the size of the North Ranch should be master planned. However, this plan as it stands is not ready for prime time. First of all, the plan should accommodate the recommendation of scientists and add an additional 19,000 acres into conservation. Second, the plan should delete mention of dams at Wolf Creek and Pennywash Creek. In the 1970s, these dams were determined to be so environmentally destructive, the state walked away from millions of dollars in constructed levees and dams. Also, these dams would be co-opting water that should be flowing past my back door. Third, the plan should eliminate any mention of expressway that would cross the St. Johns River at Pineda. Such a road will violate the public trust by thrusting an expressway through the River Lakes Conservation Area and the Riviera Wilderness Park. These are lands that are supposed to be in perpetual conservation for the greater benefit of the public. Deficiencies in the plan need to be fixed by you. Given the current climate in Tallahassee, they won't be fixed by state reviewing agencies. First of all, current rules do not allow reviewing agencies to consider need when reviewing development proposals. The powers that be in Tallahassee have created an atmosphere where development proposals and environmental regulations are creatively interpreted under the guise of promoting economic opportunity. The reviewing agencies looking at this plan will initially wring their hands and make some noise, but they will cave in the end game, and the rubber stamp of approval will be applied. Basically, state reviewing agencies, unfortunately, have been relegated to the status of the royal family in England. A lot of ceremony, but not much power. State employees who are perceived as not being on the economic opportunity team are shown the door, and we've seen examples of that recently right in the Orlando Sentinel. Mr. Jacobson is aware of all this. That is why he is so anxious to get this plan out the door and up to Tallahassee, because he knows what will happen to it when it gets there. The ranch is not talking about breaking any ground on this proposal until late in the century, as the previous speaker mentioned. So it doesn't seem unreasonable for you, the commissioners, to take a few weeks or months to get the plan right. You have the future of Central Florida in your hands, and it is an awesome responsibility. Only you, the way the state sits now, can fix this plan. So I ask you to rise to the occasion. I have one more comment. We have a pending state government shutdown in July 1. Is this plan, if you do transmit this plan, what happens to that timeline if the state government is shut down, since these seem to be statutory timelines? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next speaker is Pam Maharg. Welcome, Pam.
Thank you, Commissioners, for allowing me to speak. And I want to thank you also. I spoke back on October 4th and requested that you delay the transmittal of this proposal to Tallahassee, and I appreciate your vote, and for setting up the meetings with the environmental groups that you allowed. I was able to attend 2 of those meetings. I am also a volunteer, so that paid job required my attendance more often than I would like. Both your staff and meeting with the representatives from Deseret went very well. I appreciate all of the efforts they made to listen to our concerns and address them in many cases. And I want to thank you all particularly for allowing the hiring of 3 peer review experts to look at the plan that Deseret had submitted. I'm a little disappointed just in that, after y'all spending money for that and the gentleman spending 3 months looking at the plan, that more time hasn't been given to look at what they recommended. They have specifically recommended a little over 19,000 acres be added to the conservation and agricultural portion of this land. In specific, they have found regionally significant resources not included. And as I looked, what Mr. Jones was talking earlier, that is something that y'all are supposed to do as you look at these plans before you transmit them to Tallahassee. Thousands of acres of old growth, mesic, and scrubby flatwoods were neither identified nor protected in the Deseret plan, nor are they now in the plan that's looked to be submitted to Tallahassee. All of this particular growth is underrepresented in the Florida Naturals Areas inventory now, in that it covers less than 15% of its historic extent here in Florida. So we would look for that to be protected, and for this additional acreage to be included in the plan before you submit it for transmittal. I may have the wrong columnist for the Orlando Sentinel, but in the last week or so, I believe it was Scott Maxwell, wrote a column about vision and the cities that are doing well in Seminole County and Orange County. He mentioned Apopka, which just passed another rule not allowing any more drive-throughs in Apopka. That's their vision. Then he talked about the vision of cities like Winter Park and Oviedo and how well they have done, because 20 years ago, folks had a vision of what they wanted those cities to look like, and now they prosper. This is your vision. This is your county. I'm asking you all to take the time to make sure this is right, unless it is that you want to transfer the vision of Osceola County, what you want this county to look like, to bureaucrats in Tallahassee. It's your county. Take the time to make sure this is right before you give it to other
Thank you, ma'am.
folks to look at.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Jeff, can you come to the microphone real quick? I just wanted to ask a quick question. Earlier in there, you were going through 3 different items specifically, and you talked about expanding the environmental corridor north of 192. That expansion that you all are talking about, how many acres does that take in?
The addition, the
Yes, sir.
expansion. Let me ask our environmental person.
Can you find out for us?
Yes.
Thank you.
From a dimensional standpoint, it doubled the width of the wildlife corridor that was originally proposed.
But just trying to.
It's thousands of feet, so it's, we'll put
If
it back
we
to them,
can
just
just
that
get it,
answer
that'd be
during the
great.
meeting.
We'll keep
Yes, sir.
moving along, though. Next speaker, Mr. Charles Lee.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Charles Lee, representing Audubon, Florida. I'm here to say that if the recommendations of the peer review report were included in this as what you were going to do, I'd be here with the fellows from Deseret saying this is really good and we support it. Because I think that what the peer review report adds to the package truly reflects the conservation needs of that property as it develops and would preserve the right stuff. And in a conventional sense, what you would do is not transmit this tonight, but you would, in effect, hold it back, continue to work through and incorporate the peer review report, and then transmit it all in an integrated way. I don't know if you're going to do that or not. What I would ask you to do as you transmit this is to give the peer review report the dignity that it deserves, because truly the scientists that worked on that are the best folks in the state. And I think that their additions are very important. So I would hope that you would make some expression as you transmit this, that it's the county's intent to continue working through these issues and to integrate the peer review report in which you finally take to final adoption. And I think you could do that with some words that would be useful, even if you choose to transmit tonight. I will say that in the time that has transpired since October, there have been a great deal of improvements to the goals, objectives, and policies. The issues about the security of the conservation easement, what would happen to the conservation and agricultural lands in the interim, in my view, have been resolved favorably. One item that I would ask you to consider doing is a further amendment to the section on page 9-7 regarding water conservation. There's a proposal on the board which your staff is recommending. My point of view is that doesn't quite get us there. And I would ask you to consider amending policy 3.2 to insert the terms that say that you are going to utilize landscaping that is comprised of plants drawn from the Florida Native Plant Society list that is associated with and is referenced in WaterStar. And further, that you would provide that as you move forward, that there would be minimal utilization of turf in residential, industrial, and public spaces. I think that adding that to the package would be very important. It's really significant to recognize you are looking out here at something that is going to involve construction in 2080. We shouldn't be just relying on the water standards we have today. We should be trying to really do the best out there.
Thank you, sir.
And you can achieve that by making that small amendment.
Mr. Lee, that's your time, sir. Thank you. Next speaker we have is Ms. Marjorie Holt.
Yes, good evening, Chairman and Commissioners. I hope I get through this. I've had a really bad cough. I'm Marge Hold, and I'm the chair of the Sierra Club, the Central Florida Group. And I, too, along with the others, would really like to thank the commissioners who supported the work of the peer review team and ultimately their product. I am asking the board tonight to consider the peer review and that you do not transmit it without that consideration. I have been on the stakeholder group and have had the opportunity to provide input, and I really appreciate that too. But there's a few items, some of which I'd like to address, and that's transportation. The Sierra Club believes the densities are too low for transit supportive development, and that ultimately, at the end of the day, this is going to be a driving community. The automobile will prevail. And that additionally, new transportation corridors proposed in the North Ranch divert funding resources from other areas. This is really a huge product of development, and given some of the information I have from MetroPlan, you know, our regional planning council, funding is really a challenge, and the recommendations to commit to improving existing roadways, I really think should be a priority. With regard to the reservoir resources, some of us here today, we were just at the Central Florida Water Initiative, which is a collaboration of the 3 water management districts, and along with all the input on our, you know, next, how we're going to use our water with all our diminishing, you know, supplies. And I must say this reservoir is really a request that has the potential to really harm the St. John's and its tributary. And we should be looking at our water resources and conservation as a priority, and live within our water means. You know, we do have a budget. And then on policy 6.12, with regard to management of the conservation lands, the environmental team had inserted some language in the goals, objectives, and policies, and that is related to conservation linkages and the reservoir. And it reads, should water resource development projects disrupt conservation linkages identified in the master environmental plan, then alternative linkages shall be identified and protected to mitigate such disruption.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Amy Stilling. Welcome. And just a reminder, folks, if you'll please give your name and address for the record, please. Thank you so much. Welcome.
Hi. Thanks for hearing us today. My name is Amy Stilling. My address is 10524 Moss Park Road, Orlando, Florida, 32832. This certainly is a regional project. This affects your neighbors in neighboring counties surrounding Osceola County. The roadway systems that will serve the needs of this new North Ranch sector plan are going to impinge and invade on the enjoyment and ability of those residents to enjoy their area of town as well. Not only the environmental impacts, but you've got to look at your adjacent community impacts that you're having with this system, with the roadway plan. The legacy of Florida is in your fate to decide. We hope that you have clearly heard the advice of the environmental scientists and not transmit the North Ranch sector plan at this time in its current form. We implore you to add the additional 19,000 acres as a permanent conservation per their recommendation. We are called to be stewards of this earth. You have been placed in a special position that has the power to determine the fate of this land. Will your legacy be that of destruction, or will it be remembered as a good caretaker of creation? Look at this with your heart, and you will know the answer. We have faith in you. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Next speaker we have is Jim Irwin. Welcome.
My name is Jim Irwin. I live at 116 Fernwood Street in Orlando, Florida. I'm a member of the League of Women Voters, a member of Sierra, member of the Florida Native Plant Society, but I do not speak for any of those groups tonight. I speak as one of the many volunteers that collected signatures for Amendment 1 day after day, week after week, month after month. Amendment 1 passed by 75% statewide. In Osceola County, it passed by over 80% in the same election that put you in office. I believe it was 83%. We know what happened to Amendment 1. It was sent to the state, where it was dismembered. In particular, Florida Forever, that 40-year-old program under governors of both parties, which has been a model for the entire nation, Florida Forever, had its throat cut. It's dead. Recently, the state declined to buy the 46,000 acres it would take to begin true restoration of the Everglades. Recently, the governor proposed a new director for the Department of Environmental Protection, who is known among conservation groups as a very bad choice, amounting to the fox watching the hen house. The St. John's Water Management District, just in the last week or so, lost its top leadership, constituting 82 years combined experience. That is probably directed at you and at the Deseret project as a means of clearing out of the way any possible objections to the water resource plans for this sector plan. You may not know of Senate Bill 832. It proposed to remove any county participation from any sector plan. It would aimed specifically at you. A commissioner up in Gainesville said this is all about Deseret and it would be a disaster if it passed. That bill didn't make it out of committee, but that kind of bill tends to have 9 lives. There is a statewide take no prisoners, scorched earth war going on against land conservation in this state. And right now, tonight, here, you are the front line of that war. If you send that peer review plan to Tallahassee, you're sending it to the Valley of Dry Bones.
Thank you, sir. Next speaker we have is Joan Irwin. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm Joan Irwin, also from 116 Fernwood Street in Orlando, but I am here representing the League of Women Voters. A month ago, each of you got a letter with the summary, the executive summary of the peer review plan, and a letter from the Orange County League of Women Voters that said, this peer review has identified multiple deficiencies, and we think it's because the review says it is because the original plan put forth by Deseret Ranch was based on 20-year-old single source data that had not been reviewed. At that time, the League of Women Voters Orange County, and that letter was, by the way, signed by 12 members of the League who are Osceola County residents. The League suggested that you schedule workshops to examine the peer review report, and that you ask the developers, the planners, and the stakeholders to pay attention to that environmental review. That letter was sent to you after the last of the 5 meetings that Jeff Jones described to you. This weekend, the League of Women Voters Florida, the statewide organization, was in convention, and they adopted a letter that Jim has just distributed to you that was adopted by the largest convention the League of Women Voters Florida has ever had. As you can see, it says, "We are alarmed that you have scheduled the vote to send the plan to Tallahassee. This is in spite of the fact there has been no visible response to the peer review plan. In fact, it has been ignored. It seems to have been ignored, and it has even been denied public discussion. The State League suggests that the environmental peer review reports those serious deficiencies and offers reasonable remedies and updated maps, current maps." The letter is actually addressed to Mr. Panuccio, the director of the Department of Economic Opportunity, because the State League can only address state agencies. But we sent copies to you so that you would know the feelings of the League. Their main point is we ask for one of you to make a motion to schedule public workshops for the peer environmental review to be discussed
Thank
in
you, ma'am.
public.
That's your time. Thank you so much. Next speaker we have is Don White. Don, he left? All right, we'll see if he steps back in, and we'll call him in just a second. Next speaker is Linda Bystrad. If I said that right, B-Y-S-T-R-A-D. Have this. Welcome, Linda.
It says do not touch, but I have to lower it.
It'll pick you up wherever you are. Don't worry about it.
My name is Linda Bystrack, and I live at 110 Oak Ridge Drive in Leesburg, Florida. I'm a member of the Lake County Soil and Water Conservation District and vice president of the Area 3 section of Central Florida and all the water conservation districts here. However, I am not speaking on behalf of that organization. I am speaking, though, as someone who, as a member of that group, has looked at the water situation under Central Florida and attended the Central Florida Water Initiative meetings for 10 months, twice a month. And like many others in the audience, I just came from a meeting all afternoon on that topic. I think that you might want to look at the water issues a little more carefully before you send this on to Tallahassee, because according to the documentation that's online at the St. John's Water Management District, on behalf of the Central Florida Water Initiative, you have a very serious water problem in this area that adding 500,000 new people to is not going to help the situation at all. You need to protect your current residents first. That's your goal. You should be your goal. If you need to make sure that that 19,000 acres is included in your plan, because every acre is a recharge area. And when the rain falls in Florida, we average 50-some inches a year, less than 10%, less than 5 inches is going to get to the upper Floridian aquifer. We have more people today than we have rainfall recharging the aquifer. If you leave that 19,000 extra acres out there with no concrete on it, it can help recharge that aquifer. And you're going to need that. And you're going to need it for your agriculture that's not on Deseret Ranch. What about the farmers who cannot afford desalination when they hit salt, when their wells start bringing up salt? Because of global warming, we're getting an 8.5-inch increase in sea level just in Florida. And most of that's been in the last 20 years. So that even this in Central Florida Water Initiative, they acknowledge global warming and this problem of climate change and saltwater intrusion coming not just from the ocean into our aquifer, but from the bottom up on the lower Floridian aquifer, which is brackish water. Now the farmers, they cannot afford to desal that water for their cattle or their crops. The utilities could spend the extra money on taking that salt out. but not the farmers. So you need to look at the water situation a little more carefully and think of that 19,000 acres as more recharge area for the aquifer. I urge you not to transmit this without looking into the water situation a little bit more. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Next speaker is Bob Stammers. Or, I'm sorry, is that Bob Stamps? Sorry, I thought that was an R, sir. Welcome.
That's all right, I've heard worse. Bob Stamps, 6330 Plymouth Serrano Road, Apopka, Florida. First off, I wanted to make a slight suggestion. Mr. Lee suggested all kinds of things to improve the water conservation, this policy 3.2. If you would just add Florida Water Star Gold Standard, that would cover almost all the issues that he raised. There's two standards, silver and gold, and just go for the gold standard. I'm here representing Orange Audubon Society. We have 2,000 household members, including members in Osceola County. First, I want to thank the folks from Deseret, Don, who left the room, and everyone else, and also Jeff Jones here. They did a remarkable job. We learned a great deal from them at the stakeholder meetings, and it was a mutual exchange of information, and I'm very impressed with their expertise and their willingness to work with us. We have delivered a letter to you indicating our desire to have the report from the peer review team added to the North Ranch sector plan. And I won't go into any more details. Those have been covered by other folks. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Bob. Next speaker is Loreta Satterthwaite. I know I butchered that, Loretta. I apologize. Welcome.
Actually, it was very close to the pronunciation.
Wonderful.
I'm Loreta Satterthwaite, 6330 Plymouth Sorrento Road, Apopka, Florida. And I basically could have relinquished my time, but I wanted to add my appreciation for the opportunity to work with Jeff Jones and Don White in the GOPs for this sector plan. Also wanted to thank you, the Board of County Commissioners, for hiring the peer review team. And I hope that before transmittal to the state, that the county will ask for the review team's report to actually be integrated into the plan. I do not think you should rely on the state agencies to fix this by incorporating that part that you paid for, and it's a very good report, and I just ask that you pay some attention to it and try to get it integrated. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. Next speaker is Karen Voudray. Sorry, once again, Karen.
Good evening. It's Karina Vaudry, 2228 Jessica Lane, Kissimmee, Florida. I represent the Florida Native Plant Society, a scientifically based organization that represents every county in Florida, including Osceola, with about 11,200 members. The North Ranch Planning Area is located in the St. Johns River, Kissimmee watersheds, is comprised of vegetative communities that combine to create a biodiverse and abundant mosaic of uplands, wetlands, and water, a regionally important natural resources. Some of the native plant communities contained within this 133,000 acres are rare, but most importantly, they support a multitude of flora and fauna and their habitats, and preserving a cross-section of this is critical to the survival of these species in the future, including, water resource areas. We want to see Deseret thrive in the future and provide businesses and housing and roads in the future for Osceola County. We want to see that happen. But we want to see it happen in a responsible way that balances that huge swath of Florida that's going to be developed eventually with viable conservation. The plan as it stands now is not viable and does not provide the important connectivity for conservation to survive into the future. The peer review report was completed by 3 individuals who are state-renowned experts. One of them is internationally renowned. There should be no question that what you received is top-notch information. And they have said that their report is the minimum. The additional 19,000 acres is the minimum you need to do to have viable conservation and connectivity. Now that in the beginning of the presentation, that upland wetland mosaic that Deseret was talking about, without the resource of maps, to the south, you have a conservation area this wide, existing, viable. It's in perpetuity. The proposed connection is about this wide. So you're expecting animals to migrate in this little path with development on either side. Not going to happen. So we strongly urge, if you have to transmit tonight, if you're feeling pressure and you're going to do it tonight, don't just send that peer review as part of the documentation. Make a commitment and make it binding that you, commissioners, are going to require that it be incorporated into the maps and into the Deseret plans. It's the only way that it's going to happen, and it's the only way that you're going to have viable conservation. Only one other comment is that we would have liked to see more smart growth planning techniques, clustering population centers instead of sprawling. And that's about it. Thank you very much.
Next speaker we have is Larry Walter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want you to know you got that name perfectly correct.
That's 1 out of 20 in that.
Yeah, that's an easy one. My name's Larry Walter. I'm with Hanson Walter and Associates at 8 Broadway, Kissimmee, Florida, 32741. And I am also the chair of the Growth Management Task Force for the Kissimmee Osceola Chamber of Commerce. And we have had the opportunity to be updated on this project, and certainly our position is not any different than the board of the directors of the Kissimmee Chamber. We have been through the process with the county, the Growth Management Task Force, for the last 15 years about future planning. We've worked with them on planning the 20 years. But really 20 years is not long-range planning. 65 years is, and I'd like to thank the staff and Deseret, and by the way, I don't want to embarrass Deseret, but they are the largest cow-calf operation in the nation, and we have them right here in Osceola County, and I don't suspect that that will change very much in the next 20 or 40 years. Certainly what is important about this is being able to reach out, plan corridors, plan resources. I also sat with the folks that were up here on the Central Florida Water Initiative on that committee with them. And certainly I think that what we perceive the water issues to be 65 years from now might be different than how we perceive them now. And certainly everything that we look at now, all the data that they've generated will probably be redone 100 times before this project ever comes to fruition. It is just the long-range planning part, the conservation of resources, the looking at the transportation needs of the county that makes this project really important for us to start this process. And that's what I see this process as. It's just the starting of the process. It's not the end. It's not emotional. It's not about all the things that could be and wouldn't be. But this project just needs to start. And so the planning process is really important to start 40, 50, 60 years ahead of time. So the Growth Management Task Force would ask the County Commission to send this to the state for their suggestions, and then the process will continue. Thank you very much.
Thanks, sir. Last request form we have is Mr. Don White. Welcome, sir.
Don White, 3620 Buckstrand Lane. I'm an employee of Deseret Ranches, and I heard a couple things that I think is probably important that I try and set the record straight on, and I'll try and be brief on those. The peer review report, we've had a look at it, and there are some factual errors in it that we've attempted to correct and provided a list of those. And we still believe the right thing to do is to transmit to the state, have the state weigh in on all of the issues that are identified in that as well as the plan overall, and then come up with a comprehensive solution that addresses some of the specifics. I won't go into the technical details, but one of the issues raised today was the mesic soils thing. And in our opinion, that's factually an incorrect statement in the report. I also wanted to just, pardon me there, mention that the reservoirs were raised as an issue. And this board and frankly Deseret have no ability to create the reservoirs in the that are shown on the plan. In fact, what we've done is we've just tried to provide a place where they could be in the future if water management districts and others decide to permit them. In fact, the Penny Wash Wolf Creek Reservoir we're showing as agricultural land, and we'll maintain it as agricultural land in the event that they're not used. We're simply trying to build into our plan the opportunity to solve problems in the future for the overall region. Similarly, I guess from a transportation perspective, there was issues raised again about some of the roads regionally. We're simply showing them as placeholders on the plan, and we show dotted lines, and those roads need to be approved by others. They're not something that the plan is saying have to be there, and wouldn't be. I guess in closing, I'd just like to mention that this is not a plan that entitles us to proceed with development. This is really a framework by which we can proceed to make decisions in the future and can move forward. And so we think it's important at this time to have the benefit of the state agency's input as well as the benefit of the peer review team's report. And when it all comes back to us, we can sit down with the county and hopefully we can come up with something that we'll bring back to you for real approval in the future.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you.
Those are all the forms we have requested to speak. Is there anyone else that wishes to speak on this item that has not yet? If so, please come forward at this time. All right, seeing none, we're going to go ahead and close the public hearing section. Before we bring it back to the board for discussion, Jeff, were we able to find out a ballpark of what that increase would be in the acreage that it would add? Just for...
I apologize for, this is Don White speaking again. I apologize that I stepped out of the room when you called my name. I was out there busy on my phone trying to figure out what that acreage was, and we've concluded it's 2,250 acres approximately.
Okay. Thank you, sir. All right, we'll bring it back to the board now.
We do ex parte communication first.
You sure can.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to, I'll be the first one. I think all of us have to declare some ex parte communication. February 16th, I had conversations with Wayne Rich, Don White, Eric Jacobson, Jeff Jones, and Andrew Mai. Again, that same group on March 9th. I spoke on the phone with Wayne Rich on May 13th. May 11th, letters from Don White, copies of them to the Vieira Company, and also a letter from Eric Jacobson to myself, peer review team, addressing the peer review team report. May 18th, received 3 attachment letters from Sierra Club for the North Sector Plan, and also on May 18th, a letter talking about deficiencies of the North Sector Plan that I received from, I believe, Penny Walker. And I think I had some early on meetings with a couple of the speakers tonight from the environmental groups also. So I just want to make sure that that's on the record, that I did meet with them, Mr. Chairman, and took all the information in as part of my decision-making process.
Thank you, sir. County Attorney, do all of the individuals up here need to address ex parte communications
No, because
for this item?
This is not a quasi-judicial proceeding, so it's not required.
Okay. All right, thank you, sir. All right, we'll bring it back to the board now for discussion, debate, motion. Anyone want to start us off? Commissioner Harford, Janer, anyone? Commissioner Grebe.
I was going to ask if staff would go over the process. This is the first step in a longer process. If you could first explain that, please.
The process is governed by state statute, Chapter 163, 3184. It's the same statute that addresses all comprehensive plan amendments, so it's following that normal process. And what that entails is, as we're doing tonight, a transmittal hearing to be sent up to the Florida Department of Economic Opportunity. That provides them with the opportunity to review it pursuant to the state statute, or the requirements of the state statute. They will send copies of the plan to various state and regional agencies, to include the Water Management District, DOT, FDEP, Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. I don't even think that was right. To the Regional Planning Council, to Metro Plan Orlando, and just a host of other state and regional agencies. As was mentioned earlier, those state agencies and regional agencies have 30 days in which to do the review, to send their comments back to DEO. They have another DEO collates those. They develop their own comments, and they combine those into a report, an objections recommendation and comments report, and sends that back to the county for our consideration. Normally, the way that this works is we will obviously take a look at the report and contact DEO and the state and regional agencies if we have questions about their comments for clarification. They have focusing obviously on the objections as opposed to the recommendations and comments. Often before we prepare a final report to the state, we will go up there and sit down with DEO staff. They usually invite the state agencies and see if we can work through the issues if in fact we have some conflicts with their recommendations. At the end of that 160-day period after we receive the ORC report, we either have to bring this to you for adoption with changes, adoption without changes, or if we don't bring it to you, by statute, if that time period passes, the application is considered withdrawn. So you have, we bring that to you. You can adopt as recommended, adopt with modifications. That's sent up to the state. It goes through the compliance review. They issue their notice to find it in or out of compliance. If it's out of compliance, we either withdraw the amendment or we go forward with it, and ultimately it can be challenged if in fact state or parties withstanding object to the adoption.
So at that point, though, we're still not at a point where we're building infrastructure or building houses.
Absolutely not. What you're doing is adopting policy at that stage. And in this particular instance, as has been noted and we've discussed, we are several years off before we would anticipate any development to occur. And in fact, there are policies in the North Ranch plan that prevent development from occurring until the Northeast District is substantially built out and you have the infrastructure in place, essentially the expressways, to service development out on the North Ranch.
Two questions then. One, let's just say 5 years from now that allowed that to happen. And then they would come in for potentially a portion of this to be developed, probably phased over a time period, I would assume. But at that point, my understanding is there is more of what I call the ground truthing that's done. So if there's additional environmental impacts that are found at that point, then those would have to be addressed in addition to what's already on the table. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. An easy way to think about this is that the sector planning process has two major items in it. One is a long-term master plan, which is what we're talking about this evening, and detailed specific area plans, which are a series of plans that would actually facilitate development of a piece of property. Once the long-term master plan is adopted, the detailed specific area plans essentially reset the program, and you start from scratch. So you're required by statute as part of the DSAP to do a detailed analysis of the environmental resources on the property and provide for a level of protection to those. That's may or may not include some of the lands that have already been set aside as part of the long-term master plan. In either event, what it does anticipate, and I think what the peer review report was trying to get to, was that you need to be out there ground truthing. And that's not what's actually anticipated as part of the long-term master plan. It's a general description, it's the way the statute reads, a general description of regionally significant resources. And what that has meant in the past is that you're using available regional scale data sets, the CLIP, which most of you I think have probably heard of by now, in order to identify those. What the peer review report did, it acknowledged, in fact, that that's been done. They accepted the areas that have been identified in the environmental plan as an appropriate identification of significant regional resources. The lands, most of the lands that they identified as needed in addition to what's being set aside are those that they identified as part of their ground truthing during that report period, which is absolutely what you need to do. I think what we're trying to get to is to recognize that at the DSAP level, that needs to happen, not now, in part because, or specifically in this case, you have those additional areas, for the most part, identified right where we've identified as some of the most intense development on the site in terms of the densities, intensities of urban centers. And that as you work your way through your ground truth, you identify the species, you try and understand what the needs are, you have to do it at that point in time in the context of what we're trying to achieve in terms of development. And so it goes part and parcel as opposed to what we're doing now as part of the long-term master plan.
Okay.
Sorry if that
My second question is, if we were to choose to transmit this today with the peer review report, and the state thought everything was just fine the way it was submitted, let's just say that. I highly doubt that, but let's just say that. When it comes back to us for final adoption, we as a board do have that ability to say we do want all, part, most, none of that peer report to be included for final adoption. Is that correct? Okay. That's all my questions for now.
All right. Thank you. Commissioner James.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
No problem.
Basically, I have some notes here that I've written down during my last 6 months working with both groups, several occasions. Commissioner Hawkins had a whole list. I will just tell you that I've met with both groups several times. We all know land is a limited resource. We also know that it's one that's shrinking. It's really one of the few resources that really does not replenish itself unless you want to wait a couple of million years for volcanic activity, right? We are really blessed to have this much available land in Osceola County. Where in other regions, they're really pretty much built out. I come from New York City, and I can tell you there are few, if any, pickings left there. In my opinion, the use of this long-term master plan is the most responsible way to ensure that we appropriately design, develop, and conserve our lands, wildlife, habitats, and our water. The plan, while not perfect, will ensure future Osceola residents have land to build homes, the ability to work close to home, and the connectivity to travel within and outside of the county. Since this development is many years in the future, it is my belief that there will absolutely be adjustments necessary, which will have to be addressed, as Mr. Jones just assured us, at the DSAP level. That's when it's more appropriate. We will also have the opportunity to look at the changes in the plan once it comes back from the state, if we transmit it today and prior to adoption. With the additional commitment made in the May 11th letter by Deseret, to enlarge the proposed central wetland upland mosaic at the south end near the 192, which they just confirmed was approximately 2,250 acres, and the submission of the peer review report along with the transmittal. I will be supporting transmittal at the state at this time. And that's a motion, Mr. Chairman.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
I will be seconded. And,
All right.
Mr. Chairman, if I could go next.
Please, sir.
This is my district, and that's why I went ahead with the ex parte communication. I thought it was important that people know all the communications I've had here. A couple of things. You know, the gentleman that mentioned Amendment 1, absolutely correct. And I can tell you, Jeff Jones and I and County Manager have been working with a lot of our ranchers that want to turn their properties over to conservation, thinking the way I think you and I and all the other voters that voted for this, Amendment 1, was supposed to be and happening. And, you know, there were some other comments made about the wipeout of St. John's and everything. I don't believe that, because these groups, these environmental groups, you're too strong. You're listened to, you're respected, and I have the utmost respect. Thank you all for participating in this process. Thank you for the meetings and the information you sent to me. Tonight is not the end-all of everything, and I think Commissioner Grebe hit that. That was a great question to ask. But I think what this board is doing tonight is, long after we're not commissioners up here, we're setting the stage for how Osceola County is going to grow for future boards. I think it is the right place to do this. I think it's proper because it is regional. To further grow south and not participate with the surrounding counties and the surrounding jurisdictions, whether it's water, transportation from Expressway Authority, or however you want to look at this, would just be wrong. One, from a cost standards, but also from the Governor Corridor Task Force study. They said we'd be growing in this area. They already put out the swath, so this really falls into that. There were a lot of meetings held for the public where people had input. But the one thing about this tonight is nobody's going to walk away here with 100% of what they wanted. Tonight's not the proper place. Things are going to come back. There's going to be other hearings. I don't think the ranch is really walking away with 100% of what they wanted, because they did make some exceptions to what they first brought to us. If you'll remember, the previous Board of County Commissioners, it was one of those commissioners that moved this to December. And my two new counterparts, the pressure's on you. You inherited that from the election, so congratulations. The process at the state is just that. It is the process in place. Is it right or wrong? You know, I don't know. I think the state does take it seriously. You know, there's talk of a government shutdown. I don't think that's going to happen. If it does, I don't have that answer tonight of what happens in this process. But I will say that I do think this is the right thing to do, moving this forward. I thought Belinda's comments about the planning and as a family what you like to see were outstanding. Larry always with the comments of, what struck me probably most of what Larry said tonight was, we don't know what water's going to be 65 years from now. We don't know what those processes are going to be, but this is the information and what we have to work with. And we have to decide how we move forward. And I don't think doing nothing is an answer tonight. I think that we owe it to the region of how we're going to grow. This is the area where growth's coming. We know that. And I think that we have a great partner to work with. I think that since they sat down, they had the table open many, many times. I will tell you, most of those meetings I listed, I said, where are you at with the environmental groups? Because I did make a commitment to them when I met with them. And I commend them for working with them and not being closed-minded and saying personal property rights, this is what we want, and shutting them out. I think they did a good job with Medium. So glad to second this motion. I look forward to coming back in the service that this board's here for that time. But I think a lot of what's going to happen with this in the future is not going to be what this current board sitting here is probably going to be the ones to make the decisions. But I think there's going to be a lot of changes to water and environmental regs and like that they're going to have to deal with. But right now, this is just the start of a very, very large, long process.
Thanks,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any further comments? Commissioner Harville?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I've struggled with this because when I got on the board, we were first talking about the urban growth boundary that we are currently in place and had put in by other boards. And, you know, after my discussion with Jeff Jones at that particular time, he'll tell you that I asked the same question every time. And that is, what is it going to look like for the citizens that are going to be here when this is done? And are they going to have and be able to find a great place to live along with quality jobs that allow them to live here? So I come to recognize the planning that's needed, and we've set aside a considerable portion of Osceola County in order to grow in just within that urban growth boundary. Why? Because we've seen the extent of the last 40 years, basically, without a plan and how it's affected Osceola County. So we have areas that are further out that we had to provide water to, that allowed us to sprawl out, that we have significant roads that need repaired or otherwise, that have more traffic on them than we want because of the way we grew. So looking at this, it was very positive for me to see this sector plan come in, and knowing it is one of the largest or the largest that's ever been attempted probably in the country at this particular point, and knowing also the stewardship that Deseret has given this property over the last 50 years since they've bought it. I do look at this, and I do look at the PRT report, and I'm concerned that some of the things that they brought up. I am concerned about the mosaic of land and how it does, and I do understand that it should be possibly done at the sector level or at the detailed level after this. But at the same time, I want to make sure that as Mr. Lee said, and someone else after him, the Florida Water Star standards, we could meet that by changing one word, putting gold in there, and so that they would go to that level of standard when we look at the water. And I would encourage us to at least put that in place. We are going to set up and send this PRT report to the state, but you know, and I'm not so sure that the state will take this much into consideration about it. I assume they will look at it because, you know, I do believe that the state wants to see Florida grow. They have recognized that some of the growth that comes around here in the central Florida region and in Osceola and Florida as a whole has not been the best in the world. At the same time, part of me is concerned about making sure I identify lands that are fully understood to have conservation values and to be part of that recharge system, and trying to identify those on the front end. If this is supposed to be a plan for somewhere 60 years from now, 40, 60 years, then I want to make sure that the decisions I make today are the best ones I can make. And so I'm concerned that we have a little bit of a discussion back and forth between Deseret on whether to accept the peer review completely or to implement it or not. And I'm concerned that just including it in on our packet to go forward won't give it the weight that we are giving towards this plan as a whole by assigning our name to it. So if we're serious about assigning our name to the plan as a whole, then I think we ought to be serious about signing the PRT report as a whole, as a board too, to give it the equal weight that we see that this board believes it deserves, and I believe it deserves. So, you know, I can see there's a movement out here. I would ask that we would do two things: an amendment to the motion, if the motion maker and second would be interested, that we add the word gold to the policy on water quality, water conservation in policy 3.2, in that where it says new construction shall meet Florida Water Star gold standards, and be done with that. And that two, that in our report that we assign the same support to the PRT report that we are to the balance of the sector plan. So that would be an amendment to the motion, if I could get that.
There's been a request.
It's a request for a friendly amendment to the motion.
Sorry.
That's okay.
I understand your concerns, Commissioner Hartford. I stand firm with my belief that we are going to have a second opportunity at adoption and to look at this again. I am not against amending my motion to add gold to the Florida Star standards, so I will amend my motion to add gold to the Florida Water Star standards, and that's the extent of my amendment to the motion.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask Jeff Jones to come up and explain, adding gold, what does that do? What's the responsibilities, what's the changes?
And along those lines, Commissioner, when were the gold standards established? How often are they revised? And because my concern, I guess, is
We lock this in, we don't get the benefit, it gets better.
in 20 years, if there's a platinum standard that we need to be at, and we're locked in at gold, so I guess that's just something for discussion. Thank you.
Well, before you go into that, I guess I see as we looked in here, we talked about the best science, and even throughout this discussion, Jeff and both sides have talked about the best that's out there. So I would assume that by using the gold standard as it's stated today, it would continue to improve, and gold wouldn't necessarily decrease in value that we see unless we end up going to platinum. But that's neither here nor there.
Okay. Jeff?
Well, let me first say I'm not the Water Star expert here, so, but I will give this a shot. Let me take the last question first. There is, if you look at the policy language that we're proposing in the second paragraph, it does speak to if there are changes in the future. Those changes are the ones that would have to be complied by the property owner or developer. So if it goes to platinum or some other color, they would be implementing those standards and meeting those criteria. The difference between silver and gold, there is a very, very large set of criteria with the Water Star program that addresses landscaping and irrigation, and as you sort of ratchet up the meter there, you get more points, and you get so many points and you're assigned gold. As an example of that, there's a criteria that speaks toward how much of the property can be irrigated with high pressure irrigation as opposed to drip sprinklers. And so for the silver, it's 50% that can be, I'm sorry, I've got that in reverse. 50% of the lot cannot be sprinkled with high pressure irrigation system. The gold standard is 60%. So 40% can be irrigated in one, 50%. And so you have a lot of those types of things that you are assigned credit for, points for, that make the difference. So not a complete answer, but that's kind of where you're going.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, it's tough for me to keep my second in to the motion maker, not expecting that to come, not doing a lot of research, because is that just for residential? Does that count towards ag? Is it
accounts for development, so it's commercial, institutional, industrial, and residential. TWA's Water Star program applies only to residential. This policy would apply to all urban land uses.
To ag as well?
It is not. It's not.
Okay,
no,
I just want to make sure. All right.
So, but commercial ag operation would still be ag?
It would still be ag.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind, I'd like to ask the ranch how they feel about this addition.
Sure. Sure.
Mr. Jacobson, can you come up and answer that, or a representative?
I just wanted to add additional clarification, but I can wait till after this question's answered.
Thanks, sir.
I don't know enough about the gold and the silver yet at this
Yeah,
point. And I'm sure you guys have either looked at this or have not. I'd just like to know.
Yeah, my recommendation would be leave the wording the way it is. We worded it pretty carefully. It says at a minimum, new construction shall meet the Water Star standards, and it says in the future, regulatory agencies are expected to develop new or improved water conservation measures and techniques, and those will have to be adopted. And I mean, you're talking about doing something that's going to happen 40 years from now and saying, you know, what's got to be this gold, and who knows what that's going to look like. I think what the wording does is it creates kind of a minimum framework so that when you go through the DSAP process, that then whatever the appropriate standard is at that time can be applied. So I would recommend you not, you know, drill down on something this big to a little thing like that and say it's got to be gold, because I really think this wording addresses it better. And there was a lot of time put into this as we met with the, you know, with the environmental groups and with Jeff, and I just think this is better. It's almost like taking a needle and sticking it in a big haystack and saying we're going to pin you down to that one thing. I just don't think it's a good idea. I think this is better. So,
Mr. Chairman, I just, as the second to the motion, and my apologies to those people for my lack of knowledge on this. They didn't bring it up in my meetings when I met with them. If this was tonight the end-all decision of this is what's going to be not coming back to us, I'd tend to probably be a little more restrictive and add that language. But being it can come back again at this time, I would probably say I'd like to keep it the way it is as the second to the motion.
Okay, Commissioner Janer.
Okay, I'll keep it at the original motion
If
to
it wasn't coming back, I can tell you I'd probably be there.
If you feel uncomfortable, as long as, I wanted to ask a clarification from the attorney that if this wording, Florida Water Star, remains the way it is, and there is a new standard, and I think the answer is yes, because I think that's what we've been talking about part of the evening is, so, for example, let's say they change, now instead of Florida Water Star, there's, you know, Florida Water Conservation or something in the future, being with the state of water, and we don't know where we're going to be, if there's something that's stricter implied, is it my understanding they will have to then adopt that standard no matter what this says here? Is that correct?
Well, let me state this, and then tell me if it answers your question.
Okay.
After the plan is sent to the state, and they make their comments and send it back, if the board then makes what they call any substantial changes to the plan when they adopt it, then that opens it up for the state to do further review of the adopted plan and or a challenge to that plan. So I don't know exactly the difference between a gold standard or silver standard, but if you don't have it in now, there's a chance that if you put it in at the second step, if it's a substantial change, then that could trigger a further process.
My question was more for the future. So let's say we're at, you know, fast forward 40 years into the future, they're planning what I call the first phase or the first DSAP. And at that point, if the Florida Water Star standards have changed and there's something stricter, then I am assuming, am I to assume correctly, that they would have to follow that new standard? Or would they still come back to this document and say, well, it was approved as long as it's compliant with Florida Water Star? Because if that's the case, then it really doesn't matter if we add or don't add the gold at this time.
It's probably going to be a matter of interpretation at the time, but if the standards of the Florida Water Star standards change, then arguably you'd have to adhere to those standards, what they are at the time.
And Chairman, if I might, from a policy standpoint, Commissioners, yeah, so the way this is structured is that this is going to be there's going to be additional regulations are going to be perfected and developed that this is intended to follow those new regulations as they come forward. That's one. Secondly, if it's of any help to the board, the other DRIs that the county has approved in and around East Lake were just Florida Water Star standards to comply with. They didn't have a tag of any type of higher quality. Third, what I would suggest to the board that if you transmit now, leaving it Florida Water Star, we'll be sure to provide the board with a comparative matrix of the various levels of Florida Water Star that could be adopted for your consideration at the adoption hearing.
Thank you. Commissioner Green?
Don, could we also not look as a commission, let's say we wanted to make a policy decision for any future developments and adopt a gold standard for any new development, yes, or adopt the plants from the Native Plant Society plant list? Is that not something we do more comprehensively? Because I think for me that would be the better way for us to possibly workshop that and talk about it as a holistic approach as opposed to pinpointing specific developments.
And
And then that
Commissioner-
way, we don't have these conversations.
That's true, create more of an
It'll be
environmental
standard, yes.
Yeah, that's true.
And Commissioner, that's a good point, and so everyone knows is that, we had this discussion earlier that, say that you end up transmitting this and adopting something, that does not prevent the board from changing this part of the comprehensive plan or any other part of the comprehensive plan with regard to Florida native plants, Florida Water Star, and any various levels for any particular area or across the entire spectrum of the county.
Yeah, because I think it's something we're going to have to look at because we do have a water crisis. And so having a very hard discussion about that, I think, is something that we need to look at in the very near future.
All right, we have the original motion and second. Commissioner Harford, did you have something else further to add?
I just wanted to just further reiterate that basically what we're heard, and I even heard the ranch talk about it, is a minimum standard. And you know, we need to get ourselves above the minimum. I'm sorry, we need to. And sooner or later, it's gonna come back to haunt us that we just only do the minimum. So I understand, I can certainly perceive the support here, and I do understand also, in order to keep my fingers in the game, I have to end up voting for this, even though I may not like what I want, in order to keep my fingers in the game as far as the rules of bringing up additional items or this particular vote in itself. So I guess I'm going to say that I'm not that happy. I think we need to go above the minimum. We need to look at how we're doing this. We're talking about water, which we don't know about, but I guess I'll err on the side of saying, no matter what our water looks like then, I don't think it's going to be any better than it is today. I think it may be worse. Just for curiosity, I'm going to say that, and I'm going to say that the ability to save natural resources and recharge our aquifer is not going to get any easier 20 years from now. It's going to get tougher. And so when we make these decisions today, we're setting the minimum as the floor we want to be. And I think that we need and we owe it to those citizens that will be in this county in the future a higher standard than the minimum. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Reeve, you have something else to add?
I don't think I'm saying anything less than that, Commissioner Hartford, especially when we're talking about looking at, I want to raise that minimum for all, not just this particular. I don't want to pull it out. I want to look at a comprehensive way of how we can, in the future, address these developments that are going on. And just because if we agree to transmit today, doesn't mean that I won't go back to the peer report and say, I still think these things need to be incorporated. I've seen the response from the environmentalists from Deseret, and it's a back and forth thing right now. But I think that it's not over yet. We still have that final say, and I think we still may look to some of the additional items, or I may at least look for some of those additional items in that peer report. I didn't want people to think that I wasn't taking that into consideration at all. Another item that was mentioned earlier were densities, and it's something I had a concern with as well, and spoke to Deseret about that, because transit will not work unless you have those densities. And they described where you do have those transit stops, it is a much higher density in those transit stops as opposed to other areas. So I felt more comfortable once I was able to talk one-on-one and get that understanding of it. But since it's going to the other groups as well, I'm sure they'll look at it. It's very hard to look at 133,000 acres because as a previous member of the Regional Planning Council, you have a much smaller area. It's easier to say, okay, here's the hub. Well, in 133,000 acres, which just for to take it to look at it visually, Poinciana is a 47,000 acre subdivision. So we're past 3 times that, or close to 3 times that amount, we'll say, for what's developed. So you're going to have several nodes. It looks like a lot of nodes to me right now, so I'm still at 100% comfortable, but I think that will change as that ground truthing comes in and where the actual roads go in. And then I think you will see, because transit won't work in those areas, won't survive unless those densities are there. I feel that will happen.
just going to add a couple quick comments before we bring up the vote. I am the commissioner that postponed this back in October because I wanted to make sure we had adequate input from stakeholders in the environmental group. And I believe from the comments that I've heard, the folks who were at that original meeting, not necessarily from some of the folks who may have showed up here this evening or late to the process, that it's been adequate and inclusive. And so I'm glad to hear that the environmental stakeholders participated in those efforts to try and move forward. I think there's several comments from our board members that ring true to me today. And one of the biggest things that a citizen brought up, was speaking it from environmental impact, is the issue of water in the state of Florida. And I have sat on many of water initiative boards at the Congress of Regional Leaders, all the way through a regional perspective. And every time I've been on one of those boards, the one question I ask that they never address is, okay, there's going to be a water shortage. So who gets to develop and who doesn't? And so from an environmental standpoint, Osceola County is taking the pre-initiative of saying we have the natural resources. And in my mind, development should occur closest to those natural resources, because if not, you and I as citizens will be paying through the nose to ship water to Brevard, to Polk County, to Lake County. It is already a concern and has been an issue over the last 10 years in Central Florida, and not only in Central Florida, but with the state of Georgia and Florida as well. So to me, we are taking the most proactive step of all of Central Florida, because we are trying to recognize that, yes, Central Florida is about to double in population over the next 30 years. We are going to increase by millions. So let's take a proactive, responsible approach to look at development. As someone who was born and raised in Osceola County, I wish they would have done this with Osceola County 30 years ago, because I represent District 3, which is a hodgepodge of development. And we are trying to get away from that, because the other option we have here is Deseret can continue to ag it, and ag can do a lot of things to environmental condition lands that regular development can't, under the guise of agricultural development. However, we're trying to design better communities for the long-range interests of Osceola County, as opposed to urban sprawl that Commissioner Hartford spoke so eloquently about, where we are paying for those roads, those pipes, for water, sewer, all those things that we as taxpayers have to take on that additional burden because we didn't plan. And so I'm excited that we're here. I'm excited that we've taken, I believe, over almost 6 months to work with one another, and there was time before that. Mr. Lee's been involved in this process for probably a year, if you asked him. So this isn't something new. And also, the idea that this property is somehow going to be developed in a 5 or 10 year pattern is ludicrous. We have so much development opportunity currently in our urban growth boundary, and with also the addition of the Northeast District, there is land for years to come. But I'm excited that we're here looking to try and plan for the long-range future of Osceola County, but also the long-range future of all of Central Florida, because growth is going to come, and Brevard's going to face growth challenges. Orange, Seminole, who have very small opportunities to grow, who have also very environmentally sensitive areas that hopefully they won't impact, because the growth will be able to come to our community that has been well thought out and well planned. So again, I'm excited to see that we're taking such a strategic initiative to move this item forward. And at this time, I'll go ahead and call the vote. All those in favor state by saying aye. Aye. Oppose? Motion passes unanimously. Item 25, please.
Item number 25, adoption of ordinance number 2015-27 for ZMA 15-0011, an ordinance